Today we're going to be learning Yevamot Daf Kufchet. We're going to start with a quick review of the Mishna. So the Mishna, we read ktana at the end of yesterday's daf, so we'll start there and we'll get into our daf. So on Kuf Zayin Amud Bet, what is a ktana that needs to do miyun? Kol shesiua ima v'achia l'da'ata. Okay, hold on. I see you're saying a link doesn't work. What link isn't working? Oh, I see that link just didn't come out. Okay. Okay, so what's a ktana? What kind of ktana? So this is very simple. We already read this, which is any hisiua ima ve'achia l'da'ata, if her mother or brother betrothed her. We all know that. But here was an important part that we added, l'da'ata. She needs to be a willing partner. Hisiua shelo l'da'ata ena tzricha l'ma'in. She doesn't even need miyun if it was without her will. Okay. Now we're going to see here, and this is something I have to say conceptually, it's a little bit hard to understand. It's something that's going to stand at the basis of the whole second part of today's daf. I want to try to explain it. I'm struggling myself to understand the whole concept, but I'll try my best to make it clear. And maybe toch today we're learning it, it'll become clearer also to me. There's this idea that when the mother and the brother marry her off, so the kiddushin, remember, only has rabbinic value. If the father does it, it has d'oraita. He can marry off his daughter, no problem. But if he's not around and they do it, it only has rabbinic validity. But why does it have validity at all? This is the part it's going to kind of be the basis for things we're going to see later. It's because we assume that when she gets older, she'll agree. Once she does, okay, so now, if she's not even old enough, okay, we're going to see now in a minute, right? If, let's say she doesn't even agree right now, and she's not willing, then she's not willing, and you can't say this has any validity. Okay, likewise, Rabbi Chanina ben Netuchinu says, also, you don't need to do miyun if you're not even old enough. In other words, you can't do nisuin or kiddushin for someone who's not even old enough to keep her star or keep her ring or whatever it might be. Then it's only got validity because she's also kind of part of it. That's what's number one important to see. She has to be an active part of it, which doesn't have to be when her father does it, because that will have validity on a Torah level, because the father always has responsibility for his daughter and things like that. But when the father's not in the picture and someone else does it, she needs to be somehow a willing part of it. Now, as a result, this doesn't come up in this Mishna, but it's going to come up in the next Mishna. I want to already establish it. Therefore, if she does miyun later, and now this is the hard part to get, but it seems like they view it as if she wasn't really old enough in the first place to get married. Okay, now, why is this going to have effects? Because later we're going to see, what if she was married to someone, gets a get, or married to the same guy, gets a get from him, and then later gets remarried and then does miyun. So what they're going to say is when she's mima'en, when she refuses at a later stage, that miyun shows that this woman was not old enough in the first place. And it may even uproot the first marriage, even if it was, and then we're going to have to see, does it make a difference if it was to someone else, to the same person? But the whole concept here is that if she does miyun at a later point, that may be an indication that she was never really old enough, and that can invalidate any marriages from before. Okay, why? You have to assume that is a good question. And in fact, there's going to be a debate about it. So if it doesn't really make so much sense, it is an issue that's debated. But that seems to be a working assumption here, at least of one of the opinions that comes up in the next Mishnah. There's a debate whether there is a machloket about this at all or not, or everybody agrees. But this concept that her miyun at a later stage shows that she wasn't really old enough at the time. Okay, so it's a good question. Why exactly? Maybe because she wasn't old enough, she would have done the miyun immediately, and she kind of agreed to it and then didn't agree to it. Maybe that's also an indicator that she wasn't old enough at the time, and therefore the marriage doesn't really have validity. Okay, so we'll deal with this more. I hope it'll become more clear, but again, I'm struggling with it myself, so it's going to be hard for me to explain clearly if I'm struggling with the concept. Rabbi Eliezer has a different approach. He says, as long as she's a minor, this doesn't have any validity, although we're going to see it does have a little bit of validity, but he basically says it's like mefuta. It's like they're living together as a couple outside of marriage, having relations. So therefore, by Israel, right? Any ramifications of marriage, and we'll see a bright that expands on this much more, they're not considered a married couple. So when it comes to truma, for example, they're not married. So if she was married to a Kohen, she can't eat truma. If she was a bat Kohen, she could continue to eat truma, etc. Okay, so now Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Kol ha'kavash im ish ki'ilu hishto, if the husband was the one who caused the not the word I wanted to use here, but he precluded things from going on, then it's like she was his wife. If it's not from the husband, then she is considered his wife. We'll get to what this means exactly. We're going to see two different interpretations when we get to the Gemara. So the first thing we have in our Gemara is Amar Rabbi Yehuda. This is pretty simple. When you do a miyun, you write a document that says, I saw this woman do miyun to this man, blah, blah, blah. You have to write it down, and that way she has something to show for it. Okay, she has proof. It's called a get miyun, even though it's, again, get, I said this yesterday, it means document. It doesn't mean get like we think of get. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, or maybe some people say, B'manita Tani was in a Braita, Barishona. What originally? Hayu kutvin get miyun like this. Lo rayana be, v'lo tzivyana be. I don't desire you. I don't want to be with you. Anabaya, v'leip anabaya l'mintzvale. And I never really wanted to marry. Or I don't want to be married to you. But then they said, this is way too wordy. Who cares? Well, people are going to confuse this with a get. There's all different interpretations in what way and what will be the problem. We'll just go with Rashi to keep things simple. He says, maybe when you go to some sofer who doesn't really know what he's doing, a scribe, and you say, I need you to write me a get, he'll start writing these words. And he'll write these words in a get, and you'll think that this is a get. It's a little bit far-fetched to think somebody would actually think this is a language of a get, but maybe there's some other way you might confuse it with a get. In any case, we'll leave it at that, and therefore it's kinuhachi. Because of confusion, they changed it, and they said, this is what you should write. Very simple, to the point. Beyond ploni v'ana ploni pa ploni ba'ampan. On the following day, this woman refused that man in front of us. Okay, done deal. Tanu Rabbanan, another bright. Izu miyun. What is miyun? So now we have to really get at what is miyun. Okay. So meaning, what does she have to do miyun? And you're going to find some things very surprising. First, it seems pretty straightforward. Amra ifshi beploni bali. She says, I can't be with this person. I don't want this betrothal that my mother or my brother put upon me. Rabbi Yehuda says, Afilu yoshevet ba'apirion. She's sitting in the apirion, the chair of that they would marry people with. Okay, so she's like on her way to get married. They would carry her out on this chair. If you want to learn about more wedding customs, you can read flashback of Shuli Mishkan this week about weddings and apirionim. She's on the way. They're carrying her in this chair. You think of those movies with the Romans or the ancient Greeks, and they would carry them in these fancy chairs. They carry her on this chair, and she's going from her father's house to her husband's house, about to get married. Remember, she was already engaged. Now she's going to the marriage, and on the way, she says, I'm not interested in this guy. So that's miyun. Okay, so he's adding. Even then, she could do it while she's on the way to the wedding, meaning her actions are showing she wants to be married to him, but her words are saying, I don't want to be married to him. That works. All the more so, Rabbi Yehuda, another case. Okay, everyone's in his house. They're having a big party, a wedding party. And she's pouring drinks. And while she's at her wedding party pouring drinks, she says, I don't really want to be married to this person. Okay, that is also miyun. He adds another. Her husband sends her to the store to buy, sends her to the local store, buy me some milk. She goes to buy milk and she starts schmoozing with the storekeeper, and she says to him, I can't stand my husband, I can't be married to him. Okay, there's no bigger miyun than this. This is obviously an exaggeration, but the point is, this is a good miyun. Okay, you might think, oh, maybe she's complaining because she had to be his messenger to go to the store. No, if she says those words, that's miyun. We're going to see even more later where she doesn't even say words and she still can do miyun by actions. So here he said, remember, any tinoket that can't take care of her kiddushin, then that's not a marriage. Okay, so I see you're asking about the storekeeper. What about witnesses, right? So remember, it could be before any three people. It could even there was a opinion, it can be before two. As long as people saw her say it, that should be enough. Amar Rav Yehuda, because remember, we said bifnei beitim v'shelo bifnei beitim, right? It could be even both, according to betrothal. So now, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halacha k'Rabbi Chanina ben Antuginus, that if she's under a certain age, then it's not even a valid kiddushin, right? In terms of her level of capabilities. And then she doesn't even need meal. Another braita, Tana, Ktana shalom miyana. Okay, here now we're going to have, she didn't do meal. So her mother or brother betrothed her, or even married her off to this person. And what does she do? She goes to marry somebody else. Okay, now what more miyum would you want than that, right? If she goes to marry someone else, she's obviously saying, I don't want to be married to him, but she never said the words, I don't want to be married to him. She just started marrying somebody else. So Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira amru, nisu'ah hen miyuneha. Her actions of marrying someone else, what, right? That is miyum. So now we're going to have a slew of questions on this. Okay, so I get if she marries someone else. What if she gets betrothed to someone else? So Tashma, let's learn from this source. So she didn't do miyum, but she goes and gets betrothed to somebody else. Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira amru, they said in his name, kiddusha hen miyuneha. Yes. So it seems like, according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira, whether she gets betrothed to someone else or whether she gets married to somebody else, that is miyum. Okay. Next question. We have a slew of questions again. Is he the only opinion, or do the rabbis disagree with him? And if they do disagree with him, remember, we just split it up into, well, it's more likely by marriage, but it's less likely if she just gets betrothed to someone, even though in the end we say Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira holds both. The question is, if the rabbis disagree with him, b'kiddushin or afilu b'nisuin, do they disagree about both? Or do they only disagree about kiddushin, but they would agree with him that if she actually goes and marries someone else, for sure she meant to do miyum. And if you say they disagree across the board, also in marriage, they think you marry someone, you do kiddushin to someone else, it's not miyum because you didn't say the words, I don't want to be married to him. Well then, halacha k'moto and halacha k'moto. So who do we hold like? The rabbis or Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira. The questions don't stop. If you want to say k'moto, and if you say we do hold like him, do we only hold like him in the marriage, or do we even hold like him if she only got betrothed to the next person? So Tashma, let's learn from here. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halacha k'Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira. What can we learn from that? Well, number one, halacha michlal de pligi. If we say the halacha is like him, it means clearly the rabbis disagree, because otherwise you wouldn't need to say the halacha is like him. And the assumption is, since we know he held both nisuin and kiddushin, it must be we hold like him across the board. But that's still not enough. They still have another question. Last question. To have a nesiba me'ikara o dilma makaj. We're going to assume right now that this miyun is a weaker miyun. Okay. On the one hand, there's an action associated with it. On the other hand, she's missing the words, I don't want to be married to him. So the question is this weaker miyun enough to uproot a marriage to the first husband, where the mother and the father and the brother betrothed and they got married? Or is it only enough to undo a kiddushin? Okay, so the question is, until now we've been discussing her second marriage, that she got married to him or betrothed him. The question is this weak miyun strong enough to override even a marriage to the first husband? So that's the question here. So let's read it again. To have a nesiba meikar, was she married from the beginning? Or maybe she was only betrothed from the beginning, and this is enough of miyun to get out of betrothal, but maybe not if she was actually married to him. So Tashma, let's learn it from Dekalte de Abdan. You remember the kalot of Abdan? Remember Abdan? He had that whole to-do, and then he got punished that he was embarrassing this other Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi, and then he got punished. That one of the punishments was his two daughters did miyun. So this seems to be the story in the background. So these two women, imalhud, they rebelled against their husbands. They didn't want to be married to them, which were Abdan's sons. Shada Rebbe Zuge de Rabbanan Mivdekinu. So Rebbe sent a group of rabbis to check. Right? Kalot means daughters-in-law. Amru lehu nashe. So then, when they saw this group of rabbis went to check the situation, these women called out to the daughters-in-law of Avdan, Chazu gavraichu deka'atu. We see your husbands; they're on their way. They said to them, they could be your husbands. You can take them to be husbands, right? We don't want them to be our husbands. And that, Rebbe said, that is miyun. Okay? So in other words, what seems to have happened is they seem to be rebelling against them, seeming not to, we don't know exactly what that means. Rebbe sent the rabbis to check, and what they saw was this statement that they made, you can take our husbands. And he understood that to be miyun. So now, what does this prove? We were trying to prove, could this weaker kind of miyun, because they never really said the words, we don't want to be married to them, could that uproot even a marriage? Now, how do we know they were married to Avdan's sons? So they say, my love, dehave nesiba. It must be they were married. Why? Because they called them their husbands. So now they say, lo, dehave mikacha kiddusha. You could claim maybe it's their husbands from betrothal. Okay, and they still call them gavrai, who are men. It's not really necessarily clear that they were married. So this didn't really prove anything. Okay, but clearly, just to make it clear, Avdan's daughters-in-laws were clearly betrothed by their brother or mother, and that's why they were able to do miyun. Okay, that's an obvious part of the story. The whole question was, were they only betrothed or were they also married? And we don't really know, and therefore we didn't prove anything, but halachat Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira filu b'nisuin kamen. Gemara paskins, we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira, even if the first one was marriage. Okay, so even if they were fully married, if she goes and marries somebody else, that can, or even gets betrothed to somebody else, that counts as miyun. Okay, very interesting, right? Because we always thought miyun was make a statement, say, I don't want to be married to him. You don't even have to do that. Rabbi Eliezer, we're now moving on in the different opinions in this Mishna. So remember Rabbi Eliezer, it said, Em asek tana klum. She's like a mifutel, it's like a seduction where he convinces her, and she's a willing partner, meaning it's as if they're not married at all, except we're going to see, even though the Mishna didn't say so, according to this Braita, Rabbi Eliezer does require miyun. Okay, even though he doesn't view them as married, there's still a requirement for miyun, and we'll try to figure that out. The Gemara is going to figure that out as we go on. So, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Chazrani al kol tzadei chachamim, v'lo matzati adam sheshvei midotav b'ktanat k'Rabbi Eliezer. Say everyone else a little wishy-washy here. She's somewhat a ktana, she's somewhat not, she can do things, she can't do things, she's somewhat married, she's somewhat not married. He is very consistent. She is not married for anything at all, even though he does require miyun, and that's what we're going to have to figure out. But Rabbi Elazar, now he says it in a kind of funny way. He makes her like like they're just walking in a garden or in a courtyard, like they're not married. Okay, but yet they have relations. She gets up from him, tovelet, she goes to the mikvah, and if she's a bat kohen, she can go now and eat her truma. So in other words, she could sort of pretend during, certain hours to be married to him, go to the mikvah, become pure, and now she can go eat her truma. So it's a bit of a weird situation, but the point is they're really not married according to Rabbi Elazar at all. Tanya, except for the fact they're having relations, but he says it's like having relations out of marriage. Tanya, Rabbi Elazar, now we're going to have a bright, and here we're going to see where he actually requires miyun. So first, just to be clear, Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, he seems to have the most consistent opinion, where he's not back and forth, a little married, not married for this, not for that. Rabbi Eliezer says, so this is a list of things we've seen before. He doesn't get any lost items she finds. He doesn't get her income that she has, right? These are all things, rights that husbands have. He can't annul her vows. He can't inherit her. And if he's a Kohen, he can't become impure to her if she dies. Simple, right? The rule. She's not his wife at all, other than she does, in order to get out of it, though, she has to do miyun. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, he says the opposite. All those things he said no, he says yes. Her husband, for all intents and purposes, and the only one difference is she doesn't need to get, she can get out using miyun. I'm a Rebbe, and now Rebbe is going to say the same kind of thing that Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel said. This is an earlier generation. This is a little bit weird. He says Rabbi Eliezer was totally consistent, and Rabbi Yehoshua made some distinctions, and therefore I agree with Rabbi Eliezer. Now it's a little bit weird because they each really said the same thing. Either she is his wife for everything, just you need to do miyun rather than get, or she isn't his wife for anything, but yet you need to do miyun. It's really two sides of the same coin. So the Gemara is going to explain, my chilek. In other words, where was Rabbi Yehoshua? Where did he make distinctions that Rabbi Eliezer was consistent about? So ish tohi tibai get. They say, well, that's because if she really was his wife, l'chol davar, she would have needed a get. So then they say, but Rabbi Eliezer nami ilav ish tohi miu nami lo tibai. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, if she's not his wife, she shouldn't need miu. It's basically what I asked before. Doesn't really make sense. Why do they say he's much more consistent? Ela bichti tipuk. In other words, what he say is like this. Maybe I read it wrong. The truth is, you should read it like this. Rabbi Eliezer nami. Eliezer also, he says, if she doesn't really need miyun, that's the truth. Rabbi Eliezer really believes she's not his wife. What's the problem? Ela bichdi tipuk. We're going to let her go out. It looks like they're married, okay? Even though, right, they're having relations together. Very hard to let a woman just walk out after having relations with a man and just say we weren't married when there was some sort of betrothal. So it's not mi'ikar adin, as we would say. It's not by the letter of the law. But it just looks weird to let her walk out with nothing, so they require miyun. But he really doesn't view her as a wife. And that's more consistent with Rabbi Yehoshua, who really views her as a wife, in which case they really should require a get. And the fact that they don't is showing he's a little bit not fully consistent. Again, it might not be the most convincing answer, but what it's saying is she doesn't really need miyun. It would be weird to let her go without it. So they instituted it. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer. Now we try to figure out this. Akava from the ish means they were married, and akava she'ena min ish means she wasn't married to him. So hechidami akava she'ena ish, akava she'ena min ish. What does this mean? Amar Rabbi Yehuda amar Shmuel tiva'u alinaseh. So remember, she was betrothed to this first guy, or maybe even married to him, and now comes along someone and wants to marry her. Now the question is, what does she say to them? Right? If you don't want to marry the next guy, you could say, I'm already married. Or you could say, I'm not interested in you. So each one indicates what her relationship with the first guy is, right? So if she says, Machma ploni bali, I don't want to marry you because I'm married, well, that's akava shehi min ish. Akava shehi min ish means, okay, I saw someone give me the word restraining. She's restraining, holding back from marrying someone else because on account of her husband. So that means she's ki'ishto. She's married to him because she's validating her marriage to him. If she says, listen, you guys aren't appropriate for me, well then, that the easiest way to reject someone is to say, I'm already taken, right? To start saying, I don't really like you is much more complicated. So she really should have just said, I'm married. The fact that she didn't say it is a way of also saying miyun, okay? So that's interesting in of itself. But Abai Bar Avin, Rav Chanina Bar Avin say, no, you didn't understand this at all. If he gave her a get, now we're talking about the difference between get and miyun, right? The fascinating difference, particularly for us as women. In get, the woman is inactive. Who does it? I see you're giving me the word from the Koran, obstruction, right? The obstruction, it's a better word. The obstruction comes from the man, okay? That's the get. Then, right, so if she gets a get from the marriage, that shows they were actually married before, okay? And we'll see what the ramifications are. So what are the ramifications? Therefore, hu asor b'krovotav, asor b'krovavu, paslam min ha'keuna. That means it was a fair and square marriage. She now is prohibited to his relatives, he's prohibited to her relatives, and she's considered a divorcee and can't marry a kohen. But mianabo, but if she does miyun, that means the akava is ena min ha'ish. Who caused the obstruction, the problem with this marriage? She did. She initiated the ending of this marriage. Zoe akavasha ena min ha'ish, and what does it say in the Mishna? If it's ena min ha'ish, ki'ilu ena ishto, it's as if she was never married to him, which means hu mutar b'krovatah, mutar b'krovav, they can marry each other's relatives, because it uprooted the marriage from the beginning. It was as if there never was a marriage. V'lo psalam min ha'keuna, she's not even considered a divorcee. So now the Gemara says, okay, that's very nice, but there's a big problem. We don't know this yet, but the next line we're going to get to, which is the next Mishna, says exactly that. So why would the last line of the previous Mishna say exactly what the next line is going to say? So hakatani l'kaman, it's exactly what the Mishna says further on. If she does miyun, right? There's no disqualification. She's not, it's as if she was never married. But natan la get, but if he gives her a get, right? And this is from the same marriage. Right? It all depends on who ended it. Okay. So the point is, You can't say this line means that if the next line means that. To which the Gemara answers very simply, that line is explaining the line before. Okay, now it's a little bit weird in our Gemara because the Gemara split it right in the middle there. But if you didn't split it and you read it in a row, it would make perfect sense. That's the line. And here's the explanation. And now we're going to read it inside. Because basically she's uprooting the marriages as if they were never married. She can go marry his father if she wants. Everything is okay. And she can even marry a Kohen. But Natan la get, what's her bekrovotea? Yes, Rabbi Paslam and Akuna. Okay, but if he gives her the get from this marriage, then it's as if the marriage was valid. Now we're going to get to the complicated cases in the Mishna. Natan la get v'chzira. This is what I made reference to in the beginning of class. If he gives her a get, now the issue right now is machzil grushato. When you're married to a man is married to a woman and divorces her, she gets married to someone else in the interim. She can't go back and marry him. The question is going to be here: what if she does miyun? What if and what if the marriage was annulled? Then there's no machzil grushato problem. So if he gives her a get, v'chzira. Let's say he gives her a get. Okay, they were betrothed by the mother or the brother. He gives her a get from that marriage, which normally we say, that means they were married and they're all forbidden to the relatives, etc. But then they get remarried, okay, which is fine because she didn't marry anyone in the interim, mi anabo, and then she does miyun to that marriage, okay? V'niseit la'acher, and then she gets married to somebody else because she's not married to him anymore. She marries someone else. Nit'ar malo nitkarsha, he dies or divorces her. Muteret lachzor lo, she can go back to the first husband. Why? Because her miyun that she did later uprooted even the first marriage to the guy. Okay. Now you would think because it's really saying I never really wanted to be married to you. And this is where I find conceptually it gets complicated. It seems actually pretty simple. It means she basically said, I never wanted to be married to you in the first place. So they were never really married, even though we gave her a get. Didn't matter. It undoes it from the beginning. But we'll see later on that there's more to it. And this goes back to this concept that it shows that she was too young. The fact that she did miyun, again, whether we understand this fully or not, let's just go with it and accept it as a given here. When she does miyun, according to this right now, at least, they're assuming that's an indicator that she's a ktana. Rashi says this 4 lines from the bottom of Rashi here. Ki hichzira u'mi'anabo ate, or really 3 lines. Ate miyun v'gale ala diktanai u'batlua legita. It shows that she was a ktana when she got the get in the first place, which means she was too young to even have been married to him in the first place. So even though he gave her a get, it's totally meaningless. Okay. And then theoretically, this would be true whether she got a get from him or got a get from someone else. And that's going to create problems because the Mishna later on seems to differentiate. Okay. That's where we're going to get into problems. Mi'anabo v'chzira natan laget v'nisei la'acher v'nitar malo nitkarsha asura lachzor. If the order was flipped, first she did miyun, then they remarried, and then he gave her a get. Well, then the miyun can't undo the second time they remarried. And then if after the get, she marries someone else, he dies or divorces her, she tries to go back to the first husband, she can't. Because that case, the miyun happened first and not second. Zaklal, this is the rule. Get achar miyun asura lachzor lo, miyun achar get muteret lachzor lo. Okay, if there's get after miyun, she can go back to him. But if there's miyun after get, she can't go back to him. Right? The get overrides the miyun because again, on this, if we view this timeline as miyun indicates she was too young before, but then she remarried and he gave her a get. Again, she's still underage here, but we assume since she didn't do miyun, she was of age to be married to him, in which case, if she marries someone in the interim, she can't go back to her first husband. Next case in the Mishna. Hamima'enet be'ish. Okay, I'm going to use names here that we're going to have 5 men. So I'll use the names of the kids of Yaakov, just to make it easy. Like they'll remember who's number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and then Yisachar, number 5. Okay, so here goes. She's mima'enet be'ish. Then, so she marries Reuven, betrothed by her brother and or mother, right? And then she's mima'enet. She does miyun to Reuven. Niseit la'achel, she marries Shimon, vigirsha. Shimon divorces her. La'achel, she marries Levi, umianabo, she does miyun. La'achel to Yehuda, vigirsha, and he divorces her. Okay, so we have miyun, get. And then some people even have the girsa to a 5th, to Yisachar, let's say, and he divorced, and she does miyun. Okay, it's not so important how many, really. Zaklal, kol sheyotza hemenu get, asura lachzor bo. B'miyun mutar lachzor bo. 1, 3, and 5 was miyun. She can go back to those husbands because basically her marriage was uprooted. But the 2 that she has a get from, their marriage stands, which means that she can't go back to them because there was a valid marriage. And if she was with someone else in the interim, right? Let's say after number 2, she was legitimately with the number 4, married to him, she can't go back. Seems like even maybe the one she did miyun to, maybe she can't go back. It's not 100% clear. So we're going to have to figure out what's going on. So the Gemara says, Al ma'atim miyun mevatel get. From the first part, we see that the miyun overrides the get. And again, going back to Rashi, this means as soon as she does miyun, it shows she was never old enough to be married, even in the first place to him, even the marriage that had a get associated with it. And that totally contradicts what we just learned in the end of the Mishnah. What do you see here? You would have said, based on the beginning of the Mishnah, since she did miyun to number 3, it shows that even with number 2, she wasn't old enough to be married, and we should wipe out that one as well. And that's not what it says. It says she was fair and square married to number 2. And likewise, when we get to number 4 and number 5, she does miyun with number 5, that should undo number 4. So those 2 parts of the Mishnah don't seem to work together. To which the first easy answer, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, sort of easy. Tavra misha shana zo lo shana zo. We have a machloket in the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah is according to one person's opinion, that miyun shows she was too young and anything before that is undone. And the second part of the Mishnah is somebody else who holds no. Miyun undoes that marriage, but if there was another marriage, presumably even to the same person, if there was a get before, that would have been a valid marriage and she wouldn't be allowed to go back to him if she married someone else in the interim. That's Shmuel, okay? I'm a Rava, umay kushya. Rava says, I don't even understand your difficulty. Dilma miyun didei mevatel get didei, miyun dechavre lo mevatel get didei. In other words, right, the issue is, notice the difference between the Reish and the Seif. It's a very obvious difference. One is she's uprooting her marriage to the same person, right? Her miyun undoes her first marriage to that same guy, as opposed to her marriage to somebody else. Now, why would this make a difference, right? Her miyun can't undo a marriage of hers to somebody else that was before that. So why? So now we're going to question this a little bit. What would be the difference? Okay, so the difference they say is like this. The issue is, if she married number 1, he divorced her, then she marries number 2 and or whatever, that was miyun, and then she marries number 2 and he divorces her, and then she marries number 3 and she does miyun. Well, she goes and marries someone else. What are we worried about? We're worried, the reason why we don't allow miyun dechavre levata gita didei, that her marriage was Shimon, which was undone by a get. We're worried that maybe Shimon will regret that he divorced her, will want to remarry her, and he'll be winking at her, making eyes with her, trying to seduce her back into marrying him. Now, what's the problem? She's already gone and married somebody else. Now, why would he be doing this? She's a married woman, but remember, she's still underage. So she could easily do miyun to get out of it. If she were married to someone and she was older, she'd need a get. Now, get is not in her capabilities to give. But miyun is totally something she could just say, oh, I don't want to be married to you, and go with him. So he might want to lure her away. And therefore, they say you can't be machzir grushato in this case. It's as if you were married to him. You're not really married to him. Really, the miyun came and really did undo everything. It showed she was too young, underage. But when it's somebody else in the picture, we're worried that he's going to pull her away from somebody else. That's when, right, we don't allow it. But the truth is that's not really true here. Both cases would have that concern. Miyun didei nami lo mevatel gita didei. Remember the first case. She had a get from her husband, then she had miyun, and we say that undoes everything, and you don't have to worry, right? But then she goes and marries somebody else, and the whole thing is she wants to go back to her first husband. There also, you have the same concern. Maybe her husband will try to lure her away from this second guy. That's either case has at least 2 people in it, and one guy might lure her away from somebody else. The idea to right? He's still going to lure her away from guy number 2 in the first case. So they say, no, we're not worried in that case. Why? The difference between case number 1 in the Mishnah is she did miyun, right? It was get, then she did miyun. She showed, I don't want to be married to you. So when she goes and marries someone else, we don't have to say you can't go back to the first husband because we're not worried about the first husband luring her away because she already said, I don't want to be married to you. We don't really think she's going to change her mind. Whereas in the second part of the Mishnah, where it said she's married to Reuven, then Shimon, then Levi, then Yehuda, then, right? All the ones she got to get from, she didn't initiate the breakup. So we are worried in those cases that he might lure her away. Okay, so logically that makes some sense. So that's his opinion, which basically shows that it has nothing to do with age. Yes, it has to do because she's underage, but it's not that it shows that it was nothing. Really, everyone agrees it shows that it was nothing, but because of this outside concern that he's going to lure her away, which we don't want, that's just not right. So we're going to say you can't bring her back. So now they say, but Rava is basically saying, therefore, it's so obvious that this is the distinction that there's not even a question. But they continue and say, okay, so if there is a question, though, in contradiction within this Mishnah, this is what it is. It's within the second part, with another person, there's an issue here. We'll explain. In the beginning part, there were two cases. There was the case where she did get, right? He did get, then she did miyun, and miyun was at the end. So that uprooted everything. Then we had the case where she did miyun, but then they got remarried and he gave her a get, and then she went to somebody else. So again, miyanabo, she refused, and then he remarried her. Natan la get, v'niseit la'acher v'nit alma onit karsha, asura l'chzor. If she married someone else and she got divorced from him or widowed from him, she can't go back. Now, notice specifically the two options they gave and what option they did not supply here. Tama dinit armala onit garsha. The reason is because she was widowed or divorced. Ha miyana, but if she did miyun, what would you say then? Muteret lachzor lo. Why would you, right? It's an inference. You don't necessarily have to infer this, but they're inferring that because it doesn't say it, especially if we're talking about miyun. You could have easily brought that as an option. Therefore, what does it seem to imply? If she does miyun with number two, even though she ended with get with number one, she can still go back to number one because what did miyun do? It undid, right? It showed she was never really married to him and not even to him, but not even to the first guy. Based on the logic we said before. If miyun works, what does it basically show? That she was never married to anybody previously. And therefore she can go back to whoever she wants. But that contradicts the next part of the Mishnah. But if she gets out miyun, she can go back. And this case said if she gets out miyun, she can't go back to guy number one. So right? So we basically have a contradiction. Does the miyun of one person uproot the marriage to a different person when there was a get? So Rabbi Elazar, Tavra Misha Shanazo, Lo Shanazo, just like I think it was Shmuel. Yeah, Shmuel who said it in the first case. Rabbi Elazar says it here. Split it into two. There's two different opinions here. One thinks a woman's miyun could uproot all the marriages that were before because it shows she was never old enough to be married. And one thinks not. No, her miyun undoes that marriage, which is what I would have said logically, right? But it doesn't uproot a different person's a marriage to someone else that actually gave her a get. That was a fair and square marriage that had ended in get. And then machzir grushato would apply, depending on the scenario. Ulla amal kigon sheshalsha begiti. Ulla says it must be a case where she had got three gets. To mechazia kigdola. Once you already get a get multiple times, it already looks like, again, it's about what this looks like. It looks like she was already older. She's entering into all these marriages and the men are divorcing her. And divorce is something older people, right? That it's for a gdola. It's going to look like she's older than she really is. And therefore, in other words, it looks weird to then say, oh, you can go back and remarry him. Really, nothing was ever really relevant. It's hard to nullify a bunch of actions. Okay, so that's what he says. Going back to Rabbi Elazar, who says, Tavra mish shanazo lo shanazo, we want to know, where do we see that there's two different Tanaitic opinions? It's hold this. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, my dichtiv, it was said in a pasuk, Meimenu b'kesef shatinu eitzenu b'mechir yavo, very famous pasuk. So, or I should say well-known pasuk. So it says here, we're going to drink our waters we're going to have to pay for our water, okay? And we're going to have to pay for our trees, right? Things that normally you have all over, but, we're going to have to pay for it. What does this mean? It means meimenu or mayim is Torah, right? Torah is always compared, or it's often compared to water. We're going to have to pay for our Torah. What are we talking about here? They asked this halacha in a time of sakana where the Romans had all these decrees. And exactly our case. She leaves the Rishon beget, the second b'miun. Can she go back to the first? They hired someone for 400 zuz. Why they have to hire someone? This is why they had to pay for their Torah. Rabbi Akiva, remember we had that whole case of Rabbi Akiva in jail. They had to go ask Rabbi Akiva in jail, so it was maybe dangerous for him to go. They had to pay him all this money to go ask Rabbi Akiva the question. And he forbade it. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira ben Tzivan v'asal. Amar Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi lezo lo utzrachnu. We didn't need this, of course not. Lisur karet hitar to lisur lav lo kol sheken. When it comes to karet, meaning we allow miyun to work to undo a marriage that theoretically is a marriage and she's a married woman, and yet we permit her now to go marry anyone she wants by miyun. Lisur lav lo kol sheken. Of course, we're going to permit her for returning to her divorced husband. That's only a lo taseh. So basically, what you see here is Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira said, no way, no how. Now, she had to get with one and miyun with the other. That doesn't undo the other one. And comes Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi and says, of course it does. Okay, there's your machlok. But Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi continues on and says, it can't possibly be that's what you guys are asking. Biram kach shalu, it must be your question. The question they asked was something else. He says, that's so obvious, it's the question, the answer, that I'm going to assume your question was something else. Okay, maybe you had a tradition about what the question was. So here we're going to see in the presentation what he claims the question was. His uncle's wife, okay, his uncle through his mother, shehi shnialo, who's forbidden to him as a second degree, okay, your uncle's wife, your uncle through your mother's brother, okay, so Leah and Aaron are brother and sister. Aaron married Yael, who was young, a minor, married off by the brother or the mother. And Reuven is so Leah and Yaakov are married, have Reuven. Yaakov has another wife, Rachel. So Yosef and Reuven, who are brothers through their father, not through their mother. So now, Nisa'a achiv me'aviv. Okay, so we have Eshtach imo. So Yael is a second degree arayo to Reuven, which means it's only rabbinic. Then Aaron dies. Okay, umet. Then, Nisa'a achiv, so it doesn't say he died, but it's obvious here from the continuation that he dies. Then, Nisa'a achiv me'aviv. So Yael now goes and marries Reuven's brother. So first he married Reuven's uncle, then he marries Reuven's brother. Now, Reuven's brother and Reuven's uncle are not related because Reuven's brother is through his father and Reuven's uncle is through his mother. So Yosef can go marry her, no problem. So now, umet, if Yosef dies, what's supposed to happen? Reuven's supposed to do yibum with Yael. What's the problem? Second degree rabbinic arayot. So, ma'u shetima'en hashta, can Yael now go back and do miyun to Aaron even though he's dead and say, ta'akrinu l'nisuin kamai v'tityabem. Can she uproot the nisuin and do yibum now with Reuven? So that's the question. So comes the Gemara and says, that's the question they asked. So they say, yesh miyun lachar mita b'mkom mitzvah olo. Can you allow miyun after the death? Can she retroactively go and retroactively annul a marriage from before, even though she's married already to somebody else? She go back and do that once he's dead in order to fulfill a mitzvah. That was the question. Sachru b'nei Adam arba'mi zuz. They hired some of 400 zuz. Ubav v'shalu Rabbi Akiva bet hasuin ve'asal. Et Rabbi Yehuda ben Beteira ben Tzim ve'asal. And they both forbade. Okay, and that's what the question was. Am Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ashyan u'mode Rav. Now going back to Rav from before. Mode Rav shemuteret la'achiv shel zeh shenescha. This is interesting. She can't go back to her first husband because we're worried about what? He's going to wink to her and try to seduce her. But it's not really that she was married to him. So therefore, his brother is permitted to her. Because really the marriage was never really a marriage. It's just we're worried he's going to lure her. So he says she's permitted to the brother. Pshita, the Gemara says, it's obvious. Why? Because who knew the whole concern is he's going to lure her away. The brother doesn't have a relationship with her. He's not going to lure her away from the new husband. So they say, well, I was saying this because you might have thought, since we're viewing her as married to the first one, maybe we'll be viewing her as married. Maybe we'll be stringent and forbid her to his relatives. But we're not. Second version, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ashan, the opposite, he said. Just like she's forbidden to him, she's also forbidden to the brothers, to which they asked, but why? Why should she be forbidden to the brothers? She wasn't ever really married to the first guy, halachically. And the whole concern is he's going to lure her away. And she's not, right? The whole idea is someone she's familiar with will be able to lure her back in. But someone she's not, the brother, she never had a relationship with him. So they say, the exact opposite of the first reading, which is we actually just institute because we want to claim that we're going to view it as if they're married in order to prevent him from luring her. Therefore, we forbid his brother as well. That's it for today. We'll start with the new Mishna tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody.